Welcome to Discovering Africa Through Technology, the podcast series that showcases the brilliance of Africa's great minds, innovators, and experts as they tackle complex challenges with homegrown solutions driven by knowledge, technology, and innovation. Our podcast is inspired by the African Union Agenda 2063 Aspiration 7, which seeks to rebrand Africa and change negative narratives and perspectives through science, technology, and innovation. We believe that Africa has the power to solve its own development challenges and become a strong, united, resilient, peaceful, and influential global player and partner. Join us as we explore the transformative potential of technology in Africa with your host, Razia Kulatain Mwanga, and learn from the experts driving change on the African continent.
And today in the program, we celebrate the International Women's Day on investing in women, accelerate progress, through recognizing and honoring feminist women change makers who have done exceptional work to invest and accelerate progress in their careers and professional spheres of work and influence. Today we celebrate Maria Matui, the country coordinator of Gender Climate Change Coalition Tanzania and the legal secretary, Women Action Towards Women Economic Development. The chairperson, Tanzania Women Human Rights Defenders. Welcome to Discover Africa Through Technology, the home of African great minds.
Thank you so much, Ms. Razia. I am pleased to be here with you.
It is my pleasure to host you today, Maria. And today we shall be talking about shifting to a green economy and care society in terms of gender climate justice. Start us off, Maria, my learned friend. Why are you so passionate about climate change and justice?
Thank you again, Ms. Razia. I'm honored and pleased to be here in the program with you. I was born, raised, educated in Tanzania with the privilege here and there to visit, learn, and engage with other individuals, organizations in different parts of the world. My interest on climate change, really, I would say it's mostly the love of nature that drove me from my career, which is legal, human rights, based mostly to climate change agenda. And I would say also mostly has been an inquisitive mind, really wanting to understand and get a better knowledge on why certain groups in society are less privileged or less in terms of secure information, participating in meaningful spaces, in matters and issues that are affecting them directly. That has been a drive for me, even in the organization that we formed with my other friends called Women Action Towards Economic Development, but also the initiative on Gender Climate Change Coalition, in seeing how gender issues are being articulated, are being meaningful, engaged, or rather included in our strategies, plan, and policies, but also how the implementation are really cutting across and the issue of financing. The other one on women human rights defenders is again with the realities of human rights, which I have been working in that area for more than 15 years, and with the knowledge of how women needs and women rights, when they are violated, how their protection is far-fetched. So for me, this has been my catalyst to be who I am today and to do what I'm doing. And I would say mostly is passion. And adding to that is the knowledge that I gained through the work that I've been doing the past decade and a few years, but also the education that I was privileged to receive, and the drive that to know that I have a responsibility towards my community, but towards myself as well, to give back to what I've been given.
Thank you, Maria. That is quite interesting. I would like to know, as we celebrate International Women's Day, in your different roles as the chairperson of Women Human Rights Defenders, and also as the coordinator of Gender Climate Change Coalition and Women Action Towards Women Economic Development. When you talk about the role of invest in women to accelerate progress, what have you been doing in these three portfolios to make sure that there is justice and there is awareness, and women are protected in these spheres in terms of climate justice.
With the Women Action Towards Economic Development, which we celebrated 10 years last year, as a voluntary organization, when we started with other colleagues with different backgrounds, ours was the gap that we realized has been persistent. And this is the inclusion of rural communities in terms of engaged, meaningful engagement for that sense in land issues, ownership of land, but also securing their rights when they're violated. And that doesn't mean that there was no formal structures which could support the institution within these respective areas, but rather is the access to information, which was very minimal, but also taboos and culture from the societies, specifically those that are living in peripheries of cities and in rural communities. There are certain things to them is not practical. When we were engaging the coastal regions and the rural areas of Morogoro, interest was mostly to make them aware, assumption that we had, making them aware of what are the land rights and how they can partake the land rights as they could be or as they have been enshrined in our legal instruments, the Constitution, the land laws, both village land law and Land Act. But the fascinating part that we encountered when partaking those trainings was the basic, mostly very basic knowledge that they thought and they believed they have their rights, but they didn't know how to go about their rights. But then another interesting thing was, by that time, 10 years back, the issue of climate change was not very topical, at least not to the Women Action Towards Economic Development. So there was this cry out of, there's so much drought, they're not yielding produce as they used to do. And there's so much increase of violence between men and women, both at their homesteads, but also within the community. So for instance, when women are going to till the land and then try to put some sort of local irrigation, men will go and remove those items, claiming that they're not supposed to do that. So there was that minimal conflict between the societies that we were conducting this study, and here was in Morogoro. So now we figured out it was not just about land rights, that a woman should equally have a right to own or secure a title, claim whatever that is related to that land as a woman or as a member of that particular family, either be jointly or individually. But then there was an issue which was really persistent, and that was the issue of water scarcity, the issue of those who used to fish in rivers. There was the issue of fish scarcity. So the livelihood, sincerely, was being unstabilized in a sense that we couldn't really entail what was that we could engage the community. So the first step that we thought could be meaningful was to give power to women themselves. And that was forming groups of women themselves to identify their leadership. And it was train of trainers, so there are 30 women, and each group will have 10 women, so there are 3 groups. And in each 10 women, every woman was supposed to go to extend the knowledge they received to 10 other localities within the vicinity of where this person will be living. So this was truly outside our responsibilities as WATED. This was totally mandated to the communities, to these women who were trained, and ours was just to provide leadership. So 2 things here which are coming up is to give autonomy to communities themselves, specifically women, but also to the agency to women themselves, and the power which now they can use to demand for their rights. So after that process, we link them with the village leaders, we link them with the municipal leaders, and eventually we link them with the members of parliament. We even took them to parliament in Dodoma so they can have the audience of how the policies, laws, and all that are being discussed, and how they can put their political leaders into task to commit to the promises that they've put forward, so they can be able to defend their own rights without other people speaking for them. That is for Women Action Towards Economic Development. For the Gender Climate Change Coalition now this was scale up of the initial issue of land, water scarcity, and as WATED, we came into learning the climate finance, and that was questionable to us. How does climate finance relate to all these issues that we are looking into? The pillar of economic justice, the pillar of legal rights, the pillar of leadership, and the pillar of women having agency in all the issues that they are partaking. We had a few discussion with a few like-minded organizations, and we conducted sort of engagement session with few organizations in 6 regions. And after that engagement, that enabled us to come up with a sort of a loose network on climate financing. Essentially was to make women rights organizations and environmental groups, specifically those based in rural areas and peripherals of the cities, that what exactly that the issue of climate financing entail and how they can tap on that existence of financing, specifically to finance climate issues on issues of adaptation, for instance. That very basic knowledge that we shared in these 6 districts and the number of almost 120 organizations and CBOs were reached. We had an audience with the Prime Minister's Office of Regional and Local Government Authorities, and then it was advised for us to engage better with the government. It will be interesting if we'll be able to formalize the process. So we eventually formalized the process and established the Gender Climate Change Tanzania Coalition, of course, with a very mandated focus on gender, on climate change, ensuring that gender is clearly articulated, but also the implementation of all climate change issues within the country, specifically on adaptation. When we speak the issues of agriculture, water, livestock, mostly caters along adaptation to women, right? We've been available to work with other organizations, but mostly to engage the government on the studies that we conducted on nexus or intersectional between human rights and climate change, the right to health, the right to water, the right to survival and better living, the right of women on care, basically being articulated in international mechanisms on climate change, but also the regional instruments on human rights and other international instruments as we celebrate International Women's Day, of course, CEDAW, in the case of Africa, Maputo Protocol, all have been articulating very clearly on how women equally are supposed to enjoy these rights. So ours was really to ensure now these strategies, the policies, the plans do not just mention gender, but really it articulates gender and really brings in the international understanding into our local context and seeing how that can be implemented, but also including women voices directly, that including capacity building, but also hearing their stories and understanding their issues, so that it should not be made as a matter of assumption when it comes to financing for climate change, but clearly knowing where is this funding, who this funding is reaching, and to which projects that are being addressed to, which respond to women needs according to their respective localities and respective needs.
Thank you very much, Maria, for that very articulate information on what you have been doing. And I love the idea that you've invested more on information, because information is power, educating women and including women in decision making and understanding their rights and their obligations in terms of access to land, and also in terms of climate change financing and adaptation. Today, we want to deep dive more into the issues of climate change in Tanzania and what has been done and what has not been done. So can you tell us more about when we talk about shifting to a green economy and care society in terms of climate change financing for women? Can you tell us what the situation is in Tanzania and Africa in general?
Tough one. On a green economy, of course, when we look into the whole concept of green economy, which revolves around integrating environmental consideration and economic decision-making processes to ensure long-term well-being and conservation of our natural resources. It's a broader context which has several features: environmental conservation, renewable energy, for instance, source efficiency, social equity or equity, they say, innovation and technology, but also looking into sustainable agriculture and green jobs. At the case of Tanzania, much has been done, I would say that confidently, and that can be reflected in our strategies on climate change, which looks both into adaptation and mitigation, the strategies that the government had put forth. But also we can look into the efforts of our own president, Excellence Samia Suluhu Hassan, in looking into women economic empowerment generally, and specifically addressing very key issue which has been affecting and has affected many women and for many years, that the issue of clean cooking, for instance. And all that not only touched into the issue of leadership for women, but also it allows entrepreneurship in green business for women. For us working in the civil society, but also those who are in academic institution, of course, it's an area which can bring in about innovation and research, but also for our communities to see how they can scale that opportunity in terms of development through their own livelihood issues. These were just as pointers touching them in that manner. For me, green economy, I find it to be a very best solution given the time, era, and age on climate change vice, and looking into the 1.5 degrees Celsius that the global discussion has been and is still conversing. How to reduce the carbon emissions and how really to leave the society and our planet Earth to the coming generations. Maybe the way our great grandparents received it, or even better than that, if we can do that. And that will allow us to secure and to solve the problem of climate change. But what I see to be a bit a distance, or specifically on part of women, and I'll speak on the case of women in Tanzania first, is the whole context and the whole availability of possible resources to facilitate this great and grand opportunity. It needs financing, money, capacity. It needs resources, both finance and experts, to be able to drive the issues such as carbon footprint reduction, to be able to drive such as the issue of entrepreneurship for women, to be able to allow to give access to employment for people either to employ themselves, but also to open up employment for other groups of people within the society, women be the big group we're talking about here. And we cannot really accelerate these issues if a certain group is still lagging behind. And I'm saying lagging behind because the lack of knowledge, or for the lack of the limited knowledge that women harness in our society. And here I'll speak about the context of Tanzania, but other countries in Africa which resonate to our economic structures in Tanzania. Whereas we know majority of women are the one who are undergoing the care work, but also a majority of the women are the ones who are less privileged when it comes to the positions of power and access to resources, specifically financing, but also information. Then we cannot have equity where it brings about all of these people in the same table, having the same conversation with the same understanding and tapping on availability of resources with an equal manner. So for me, I would say that it is an opportunity, but it's an opportunity which has been blanketed or layered with so many other challenges, which still hinders a group of women, and many women, girls, but also young people, I would say, cut across and to tap on the availability of the opportunity before them because the resources are meager. And even now, for those who have the ideas, indigenous knowledge, they are not really squared into the basket of opportunity because they do not articulate issues the way they are being articulated or being formalized or being addressed and identified by the financing institution. So for the case of Tanzania, efforts that have been made that include having this small funding to organizations, but also build capacity to local CBOs and organizations to see how they can position and work on the issues of green economy. And here we find the issue of renewable energy is coming up very strongly. There's electrification in most of rural areas, but also there's the use and training of biogas in most of rural areas. Of course, we know the controversy around biogas again, but all this for me brings in another conversation of climate justice, where again, as much as we are aspiring to, we are moving forward in solving the climate issue without leaving anyone behind, of course, the Sustainable Development Goal, but we must be conversant enough and making an effort and necessary efforts to ensure that, and understanding that our societies are not homogeneous and our societies do not face the same issues. Our society still needs time and progressively going towards achieving the bigger goal on climate use, the carbon emission. But without capacity, without resources, some of the countries and some people in this big campaign, in this big agenda, will really drag towards realization of these big ambitions which the globe has put itself for.
Well, Maria, that was quite interesting again. Okay, you've talked about all the challenges, you've talked about the opportunities, you've talked about the areas that we need to invest and what has been done. So as we zero into invest in women, accelerate progress, what are some notable impacts and good things that we have done as a country that we can celebrate in this particular area?
There's so much to celebrate. Looking into the conversation that we're having right now, and having this opportunity even to speak to you at this particular time, to me, it's one of the celebrations that we need to key in. But again, the conversation going right now within women rights movements is taking back the Beijing resolutions which came forth from our sisters, our mothers. The issue of gender and climate change was part of the Beijing resolutions. Interesting. But also there are several resolutions from the Commission Status for Women, which clearly stipulates the issue of gender, issue of financing, and issue of climate change. And this is at a global level. So for me, these are celebrations. They are celebrations because now there's a space, at least these now are coming very relevant and very prominent, questioning the position of women in leadership when it comes to the issues of climate change, for instance, but also appreciating the presence of women in all these spaces, specifically when we articulate the issue of climate change. But the issue of care burden in Tanzania, for instance, now, the understanding is immeasurable increasing, but of course we know the issue of resources is still very meager. And the issue of gender is not now being a conversation of just ticking a box, but it's becoming relevant in a manner that it needs more articulation. It needs more clarity when an institution, for instance, or when a sector is referring to gender, in which term, in which sense, and to what percentage, what are the issues around those gender dimension. So this is a plus. But also, when I look into the context of Tanzania, specifically on climate change, now we have a focal person on gender from the Vice President's office, and that is an added value, a really huge milestone, because now we know as civil society what we carry, what we articulate, what we complement within the government efforts will have the same dialogue and conversation. But also, I think and I believe, as we have started to question where is the financing for climate change, and it's not just in one maybe global north, it's a conversation across the globe, all civil society, all women rights organizations, and even other interested in the partners questioning where's the funding for women financing on climate change is going. It's another milestone to put or to change the status quo, which has been in existence for maybe a couple of years now, just having gender as a box which can be ticked and say this was there, but now really expecting tangible and sustainable results. And by having women themselves, by having this community themselves speaking for themselves and addressing their issues on the table of discussion, but also by having frameworks and monitoring tools which entail how this financing has been budgeted for and how it has been allocated and to whom it has been able to reach.
Thank you, Maria. What is your final message?
My final message is, let us work together. Let us build climate justice movements which really speak about honest, holistic solutions to women, not just in Tanzania, but across the globe. Because the beauty of all these things, eventually, most challenges that women are facing, despite of where you are residing, where you're coming from, eventually they are similarly in so many ways. So the collective efforts, the collective voices, and solutions to these challenges, I think it's time to be more actionable and less words.
Thank you so much, Maria, for sharing your story and what has been done as we celebrate this year. We realize that a lot has been done and more investment needs to be done. We need to invest more beyond the talk. We need to invest money. We need to invest information, finance, leadership to make sure that this impact is tangible. Josiah Kulatein Mwawanga, join us next time as we bring in experts to help solve African problems.